What if I told you that one of the most common, cheapest drugs in the world might hold a secret to protecting our brains from dementia? It sounds almost too good to be true, right? Well, that is the huge question we are diving into today, looking at a massive new study that connects a go-to diabetes medication to one of our biggest health fears. Okay, so to really get why this research is such a big deal, we first have to set the stage. We're looking at two gigantic health challenges that, it turns out, are on a direct collision course with each other. So on one side, you've got the global rise of obesity, and on the other, the growing threat of dementia. For a long time, we kind of treated these as separate problems. But what science is showing us now is that they are deeply, and I mean dangerously, connected. And just to give you an idea of the scale we're talking about here, get this. According to the World Health Organization, worldwide obesity has tripled since 1975. Tripled. That's just a wild increase in only a couple of generations, and it's creating all sorts of other health problems down the line. And one of the most worrying of those problems? A direct link to dementia. Yeah, more and more research has made this connection crystal clear. Having a high body mass index, or BMI, is a major risk factor for developing dementia later in life. So, the big worry is, as obesity rates keep climbing, dementia rates might be right there behind them.
So, with that pretty daunting backdrop, where do we even start to look for answers? Well, this is where our story takes a really interesting twist, and we meet an unlikely hero, a candidate that scientists are now looking at as a potential line of defense.
Everybody, meet metformin. If you know anyone with type 2 diabetes, you've almost definitely heard of it. This is not some new, flashy, super expensive drug. In fact, the World Health Organization literally calls it an essential medicine. Why? Because it's cheap, it works, and it's incredibly safe. It's a real workhorse of modern medicine.
And that brings us right to the heart of the study we're digging into. Researchers started wondering, could this incredibly common drug, used by millions to control blood sugar, have a hidden superpower? Could it also be shielding the brain from cognitive decline, especially in this at-risk group of people with obesity? So how on earth do you even begin to answer a question that big? I mean, you can't just run a simple little experiment. This needs a ton of data and a really, really smart way of looking at it. So let's check out how they pulled it off.
The researchers got access to something called the TriNex Research Network. Think of it as a massive global database with the anonymous electronic health records of over 184 million patients. Yeah, you heard that right. This huge data set lets them spot patterns in a real-world population, which makes their findings that much more powerful.
And their plan was just brilliant. So first, they sifted through all that data and found hundreds of thousands of patients with obesity. Second, they split them into two buckets, those who were prescribed metformin and those who weren't. Third, and this is the genius part, they used some fancy stats to perfectly match these two groups. And then finally, they just watched the data for 10 years to see who developed dementia. Right, so that third step, the matching, that's the secret sauce. To make sure they were comparing apples to apples, they used a technique called propensity score matching. The easiest way to think about it is like creating digital twins. For every single patient on metformin, they found an almost identical patient, same age, same gender, same other health issues, who wasn't on it. This way, any difference they find is way more likely to be because of the drug itself. So after combing through the records of hundreds of thousands of these digital twin pairs for a whole decade, a really clear and honestly a pretty surprising pattern started to pop out of the data. This is it, the moment of truth. After all that work, all that matching, all that tracking, did taking metformin actually make a difference? And the answer was a big, resounding yes. The results were pretty striking. Okay, to understand this, we're looking at something called the hazard ratio. All you need to know is that a ratio of 1 would mean there's no difference at all. But look here, for the metformin users, the numbers are all below 1. What that means in simple terms is a roughly 8 to 13% lower risk of being diagnosed with dementia over those 10 years. That's significant. Hey, you don't have to take my word for it. The researchers summed it up perfectly themselves. This quote just gets right to the point. The data showed a clear link not just to a lower dementia risk, but also to a lower risk of dying from any cause. And let's not just skim past that second part, because wow, the effect on what's called all-cause mortality was even stronger. We're talking hazard ratios around 0.72. That translates to a nearly 28% reduction in the risk of death over that 10-year period for the metformin group. That is a powerful finding.
Okay, now as exciting as all of this sounds, this is the part where we all need to take a deep breath and pump the brakes. It's absolutely crucial to understand the limitations here. The study gives us some amazing clues, but it is not a cure.
This is probably the most important thing to remember. This was an observational study. That means it looked back at data that already existed. It found a really strong link, an association, between taking metformin and having better outcomes. But, and this is a big but, it can't prove that metformin caused those better outcomes.
And here's where it gets even more interesting. There was a fascinating little wrinkle in the data. When the researchers looked at the data from the US network, they saw that clear protective effect. But then, when they ran the exact same analysis on data from the Asia-Pacific network, the results were neutral, no real benefit. This tells us the effect might be different across different populations, which is a huge puzzle piece.
And to their credit, the researchers were very upfront about the other limitations too. They had to rely on billing codes to know who had what diagnosis, and those aren't always perfect. They also couldn't track if people stopped or started taking the drug over the 10 years. And finally, 10 years is a long time, but dementia can take even longer to develop.
So, where does all this leave us? Well, it's definitely not a green light for everyone to start asking their doctor for metformin to protect their brain. But it is an incredibly strong signal. It gives scientists a really promising road to go down for future research, like the kinds of clinical trials that could actually prove cause and effect.
And that really just leaves us with this one last tantalizing thought. As we pour billions into searching for brand new medical breakthroughs, is it possible that one of the best tools to fight a future health crisis is a drug we've had for decades, just hiding in plain sight?